The first thing I remember is the hum. Not from the streetcars, not from the radios. We were 6 floors under, and it still felt alive down there. Berlin winters had a way of freezing sound, but not that night. They told me it was just a dead building. Broken glass, peeling paint, nothing worth a second look. And the elevator doors slid open. No markings, no buttons. Just steel, waiting like it knew my name. I'd seen safe houses, bunkers, even morgues, but this wasn't any of those. You think you understand the Cold War? I thought I did too until I stepped inside. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. The building didn't have a doorbell, just a slab of metal where one should have been. East Berlin was full of ghosts like that, structures left behind by owners who vanished long before the wall went up. I'd been walking for an hour in air that smelled of coal smoke and boiled cabbage, wondering if this was another wild lead. The address came from a man who couldn't look me in the eye when he passed me the note. I figured that was reason enough to check. The front hall was a maze of cracked tiles and silence. I counted 6 broken light bulbs before I heard the faint vibration under my shoes. That hum again, like electricity trying to hide. No guards, no lock, just a stairwell curling into darkness. I almost turned back until I saw it. An elevator tucked behind a wall that shouldn't have had space for one. No signage, no floor numbers. Just brushed steel doors in a frame of rust. I pressed my ear to the metal. Nothing. Then movement. A soft click, a shift, like someone breathing inside. I pushed the button, half expecting it wouldn't work. It glowed a sickly orange and stayed on, humming louder now. My hand tightened on the grip of the pistol under my coat. More out of habit than expectation. I'd ridden plenty of lifts in hostile buildings. This one felt different, like stepping onto a page that hadn't been written yet. The doors opened without ceremony. Inside, a single bulb dangled from the ceiling, swaying just enough to cast shadows that didn't belong. No control panel, just an empty brass plate where buttons should have been. That meant whoever sent it knew where it was going, and that I didn't have a say in the matter. I considered walking away, telling Langley the lead was dead. But curiosity has killed more agents than bullets ever did. I stepped in, and the doors closed behind me with a sound I still hear when it's quiet. The descent was slow, silent except for that hum, vibrating through the rails into my bones. I watched the walls slide past raw concrete, streaked with something darker than water. 30 seconds in, I realized there was no emergency stop, no hatch. Whoever built this didn't want passengers getting out on their own terms. The air grew warmer as we sank deeper, carrying a metallic tongue that stuck to my throat. I thought about the man who gave me the address. His hands shook when he passed the note. Maybe he wasn't scared of me. Maybe he was scared of this dot then. Came the jolt, subtle like a breath catching. The light flickered once, twice, before steadying. When the doors finally opened, I saw nothing but a narrow corridor washed in green light, stretching farther than my orders ever mentioned. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't an East German safe house. It wasn't even in the reports. We weren't supposed to read. And that was the last time I believed an assignment ended where the paperwork said it would. The first breath hit like a slap. Warm, heavy, thick with iron and something else ozone, maybe. It clung to my tongue the way a bad decision lingers on your conscience. I'd smelled basements, bunkers, even morgues during the war games in Langley. This wasn't any of those. This was the air of a place still working, still alive, even if nobody was supposed to know it existed. The corridor narrowed as I moved forward, each step echoing like it had no right to be there. The walls were bare concrete, damp in patches, streaked with faint orange stains that could have been rust or not. Halfway down, I passed a steel door, bolted from the outside. No handle, no markings. Just a number scrawled in grease pencil. 7 to 4. I wrote it down, knowing I'd forget it on purpose later. Some details aren't souvenirs. They're liabilities. Then came the sound. Not voices. Not machines. A low pulse, mechanical but uneven. Like a heartbeat out of rhythm. I followed it through another turn, past more doors that didn't want to tell me what was behind them. That's when the smell deepened. Hot metal, like a soldering iron pressed to skin. It coated the air, seeped into my coat, made me wonder how many filters they'd burned through to keep this place hidden. I paused at a grate in the floor, crouched low, and felt the draft. Warm air rising from below, laced with that same metallic tang. Someone was welding or had been recently. The hum from the elevator wasn't just the elevator. It was part of something bigger, running deeper, like veins under concrete. I told myself to keep moving, just to see the end of the corridor. That's when I noticed the lights. They weren't standard bulbs. Too clean, too white for a ruin in East Berlin. American design? No. The casings were Soviet. Or close. I'd seen enough hardware swaps to recognize a hybrid job. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one could claim this place, which meant someone had a reason for it to exist. And that reason wasn't going to show up in any agency briefing. My shoes picked up grit as I stepped into a wider chamber. The air so hot, it fogged my glasses for a second. When they cleared, I froze. The room stretched wider than it should have. Fit beneath the building above concrete ribs, arching like a buried cathedral. Cables ran along the ceiling, thick as arms, feeding into walls that glowed faintly from heat. Every instinct said turn around, report in, let someone else deal with it. But instincts get you killed. Orders keep you alive. Trouble was, I wasn't sure which voice I was listening to anymore. And then I heard the clank of metal on metal, distant but sharp. Not random, rhythmic, like someone working. Or something waking up. That's when I realized this wasn't just a bunker. It wasn't hiding from the war. It was built for what came after. It sat in the center of the chamber like a mistake nobody wanted to claim. At first, I thought it was a turbine, industrial, functional. But turbines don't hum like that. They don't glow at the seams as if they're holding back something impatient. The thing was taller than a man, maybe twice. As wide, wrapped in metal plates that didn't match. American bolts, Soviet welds. I ran my hand over the edge of one panel smooth, and suddenly jagged where someone had cut corners, literally. It was patched together like a lie told too many times. I crouched to inspect the base. No serial numbers. No maintenance marks. Just a lattice of cables running out in every direction, vanishing into the concrete floor like roots feeding a buried giant. My first thought was power, but no generator hum. No smell of diesel. Whatever kept it alive wasn't standard. Not by our playbook, not by theirs. I circled it slow, noting the odd details. A hatch with a triple seal locking ring, vents that pulsed faintly as if the machine were breathing. And then, the window a porthole barely wider than my palm, covered in grime. I wiped it clean with my sleeve and wished I hadn't. Inside was movement. Not mechanical, not constant, something shifting like fluid, dark and viscous, catching the light in ways that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't alive. Not exactly. But it wasn't dead either. That's when I spotted the clipboard, half buried under a coil of cable, its paper warped from heat. Notes in 2 languages, English and Russian, scribbled in alternating hands. The top line read Project Iris. No designation, no date. Below, A single phrase repeated 3 times. Stability not confirmed. I froze at the sound, metal tapping, light, deliberate. I turned, expecting a guard, a tech, anyone. Nothing. Just the echo of my own breath against concrete. Still, I felt watched. Not by cameras, I'd swept for those instinctively. This was something else. That room wasn't empty, and neither was the machine. I don't know how I knew, but I did. For the first time in years, I wanted to leave a mission unfinished. Walk out, take the next train west, and let Langley file this under Ruvers. But the elevator was gone. I checked twice. The shaft yawned open. No cab in sight, just the hum echoing up like laughter in a tunnel. That's when I understood. I wasn't locked in with a secret. The secret was deciding what to do with me. I wasn't alone anymore. I heard them before. I saw them 3 sets of footsteps, measured, deliberate, syncing with the hum of that machine like they belonged there. I turned slowly, hand brushing the inside of my coat, fingers resting on cold steel. Then they stepped into the light. No uniforms, no insignia. Just work clothes. Gray overalls, spotless boots, faces that didn't flinch. The tallest had a shaved head, eyes like polished stone. The second wore wire-rimmed glasses, fogged slightly from the heat. The third, shorter, wiry, carried a clipboard, the kind with corners softened by too many secrets. None of them spoke. None needed to. They looked at me like they'd been expecting this moment longer than I'd been alive. I went with protocol, flashed the badge. Steady voice. Agency business. Empty words in a room where agencies didn't matter. The one with the glasses smiled faintly, like he'd heard the joke before. Then he said something in Russian. The third replied in English. Perfect English. "You're early," he said. Calm, even friendly, like we had a meeting scheduled. My throat dried as he flipped the page on the clipboard, scanning a list I couldn't see. Then he crossed something out. I swear I heard the pencil scratch louder than the hum of that machine. I asked their names. They gave none. Asked what this place was. A bald one just tilted his head toward the machine, then back to me. A silent warning. Don't ask what you can't unhear. I've seen interrogators who sweat under fluorescent lights, suspects who crack after hours. These 3 didn't blink. They didn't radiate menace, just certainty, like men who know the rules don't apply because they wrote their own. I tried a different approach. Play dumb, play lost. I'm off my map, I said. The one with glasses nodded, almost kindly. Maps don't work here, he replied. Accent faint, almost rehearsed. Then he turned his back on me, as if I were nothing more than static on a dead frequency. They didn't stop me from looking, didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Presence was enough. Each step I took around that chamber, I felt their eyes like calibrated instruments, measuring more than my height and weight, measuring intent, measuring how far I'd go before fear pulled me back. And that's when it hit me. These men weren't guarding the machine. They were part of it, maybe not in flesh and wires, but in purpose. And if they had names once, those names were buried. With the blueprints no one would ever admit existed. When I asked the last question, "Who do you work for?" the man with the clipboard didn't even look up. He just said softly, "Not for who, for what." That should have been the end of it. But then the elevator came back down. And it wasn't empty. The first voice was low, male, and clipped. Russian, but not the street Russian I'd learned in safe houses. This was polished, academy level, the kind you heard in conference rooms with too much glass. The second voice overlapped in English, the kind of English no East German could fake Langley tone, vowels flat as Kansas. Both carried through the vents like whispers in a confessional, fragments bending off metal. I froze near the machine, pretending to study a panel, while my ears worked harder than my eyes. The words weren't clear, but the cadence told its own story. Russian request, English reply, Russian assent. Back and forth, like partners settling on a number. My stomach turned before my brain caught up. Partners, not rivals, not enemies. Partners in a basement that shouldn't exist. The bald one had vanished through a side door minutes earlier, and now I knew why he wasn't fetching guards. He was fetching context, my context. I pressed my back against a support column. Cool. Concrete seeping through my coat, and tried to steady my breathing. The voices grew closer. One sentence slipped through clean, cutting me like wire. Stability window confirmed. Window, not status, not phase. Window like this thing behind me wasn't built for permanence, but for moments. I didn't want to imagine what kind of moments required both flags on the same piece of paper. The door swung open before I could move. Bald head first, then two more men I hadn't seen before. One tall, one forgettable. Forgettable by design. They flanked the doorway like punctuation marks. Behind them, the air shimmered with heat and something sharper, the scent of antiseptic. New corridor? Another chamber? Whatever it was, they didn't invite me in. Instead, they spoke past me. Russian first, then English, overlapping so fast it sounded like code. My training screamed to lock onto phrases, but something worse crawled. Under the words, familiarity. They weren't negotiating. They were reviewing, as if every decision had been carved in concrete long before I walked in. I risked a glance at the machine. The hum had changed slower now, almost lazy, like a predator after feeding. Heat pulsed through the floor in waves. I could feel in my knees. My fingers brushed the clipboard I'd hidden under my coat. Project Iris stared back in two alphabets, a marriage no priest would bless. I thought about burning it right there, letting the truth curl to ash on the concrete. But then what? Walk out empty-handed and hope Langley didn't smell the fear on me? Or worse hope, they didn't already know exactly where I was. The voices stopped. Not faded stopped, like someone hit a switch. Silence dropped harder than any gunshot I'd ever heard. That's when I realized they weren't speaking to each other anymore. They were looking at me. Come, the forgettable one said. English, accent clean. No threat in his tone, which made it worse. I followed because there wasn't a second option. Through a door sweating rust at the hinges, into a corridor that hummed like the last one's echo. Overhead lights flickered in sync with my pulse. Halfway down, I caught it. Stenciled letters on a crate, half flaked away, but readable if you knew what to look for. U.S. government property, right above a Cyrillic stamp that told the same lie. In another language. My legs kept moving, but my mind stopped cold. This wasn't espionage. This wasn't sabotage. This was something uglier. Consent. We reached another door-sealed triple locks, the kind you see on vaults. One guard spun the wheel, and heat rolled out like breath from a furnace. Inside, voices again, but now they weren't talking. They were chanting, not loud, not frantic measured, like steps in a dance too old for this century. Russian syllables braided with English, weaving something neither language could hold alone. My skin prickled under the weight of it. Behind the chanting, something hissed, slow and patient, like steam leaking from a promise that never should have been made. I wanted to ask what the hell they were doing. I wanted to run. But mostly, I wanted to know why the sound in that room didn't match the smell, because what filled my lungs wasn't antiseptic anymore. It was blood dot, and that was the moment I stopped wondering whose side I was on. The heat inside the vault hit like opening an oven, except ovens don't hum with electricity or whisper in two languages. I blinked through the haze and saw rows of tables, steel legs biting into concrete, their surfaces buried under paper. Not files, blueprints. Layers of them, curling at the edges, edges yellowed like they'd lived 2 decades underground. And on top, translucent sheets marked with red and black ink, grids and arcs and symbols that didn't belong together. I stepped closer, careful not to touch, though the urge burned in my fingers. Each sheet was a piece of something bigger, but none of them lined up clean. Gaps everywhere, like a puzzle designed to stay unsolved. Russian characters scribbled over English technical notes, arrows looping between systems that shouldn't. Coexist, cooling ducts paired with radiation shielding. Fluid channels feeding something labeled phase vector. That wasn't physics we learned at Langley. That wasn't physics anyone taught in schools. One corner of the table held maps, real maps. East Berlin, West Berlin, then slices of countryside that bled into Poland. Lines etched in blue ink stitched those maps together into patterns that made no strategic sense. No troop movements, no supply routes. Just points connected by curves, forming a geometry that looked less like war and more like ritual. Each point bore a date, some past, some years ahead of where we stood. The clipboard under my coat grew heavier by the second. Project Iris wasn't a single machine. It was a network, a spine running under cities, humming in the dark. And the gaps on those blueprints weren't mistakes. They were omissions. Pieces too dangerous to put on paper all at once. Someone had scattered them across languages, across walls, maybe across continents. Insurance against the wrong pair of eyes seeing the whole thing. I reached for a sheet half hidden under others, its edge smudged with something brown, not ink. My glove stuck for a second when I lifted it. Underneath, a signature block stared. Back at me, not a name, just initials. USA on one line, CCCP on the next, stamped in the same ink, like lovers signing a letter they'd both regret. That's when I heard it, a soft rustle, like paper shifting on its own. I froze, eyes sweeping. The tables. Then I saw it. One map still trembling from a draft that didn't exist. No vents, no fans, no open doors. Just motion where there should have been stillness. I leaned in, breath shallow, and noticed something worse than movement. A mark I hadn't seen before, glowing faintly under the edge of the page, a circle. Drawn in ink, it shimmered like oil dot. My hand went for the page, but a voice pinged me in place. Looking for answers? I turned. Clipboard man stood in the doorway, 2 guards framing him like brackets. He stepped inside slow, eyes gliding over the chaos like a man who didn't need maps because he'd memorized the terrain. "This isn't your floor," he said, softly, as if we were in an office building and I'd wandered into accounting. His calm was the kind that doesn't ask twice. I tried humor. It buys time. Funny way to store schematics. He didn't laugh. "They're not schematics," he said. "They're instructions." "Instructions for what?" He smiled without showing teeth. "For what comes next." My pulse hammered so loud it almost drowned the hum, the chanting, the hiss behind these walls. I thought about the points on those maps, the dates. Some already passed, some still waiting like loaded chambers. I wanted to tear a piece free, stuff it under my coat, run until my legs gave out. But even if I made it topside, what then? Drop it on a desk in Langley and watch them pretend to be shocked? Or watch them file it under programs with names that never see daylight? Clipboard man stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You think these gaps mean safety," he said, capping the edge of a blueprint with one finger. "They mean inevitability." And that was when I understood. I hadn't walked into a secret. I'd walked into a schedule, one already in motion. I've been in rooms where men broke bones for less than what I'd seen in that vault. My orders were simple. Verify the lead, gather intel, get out clean. Report back. That last part looped in my head as I stared at the blueprints, the maps, the initials burned into paper like a scar. Report back. To who, Langley? To the same chain of command that swore this war was black and white? The silence in those files told me what I didn't want to admit. Someone on my side had drawn those lines in red ink. I played the scenario out in my head like a bad chess game. Option 1. Follow orders. Bring this upstairs. Result? My career ends in a box or worse. I don't even get a box. Men who talk too much about programs that don't exist don't get funerals. Option 2. Bury it. Pretend the machine, the maps, the men in gray never happened. Safer for me, sure. But safer for who else? If this project fires, if those circles on the maps aren't just ink, what burns next? Berlin? Moscow? Or both sides of the ocean at once? The hum in the floor deepened, vibrating through my boots. Like a warning, I glanced at Clipboard Man, still watching me with that patient stare, a kind that says he knows every move you'll make because he wrote the script. You look tired, he said softly, almost kind. We can arrange a ride for you. The way he said ride told me the elevator wasn't the only thing that went one way. I tried to sound steady. My report won't match yours. His smile widened just enough to feel like a blade. That's why there won't be a report. 2 guards flanked the door now, their hands loose at their sides, not tense, not threatening. They didn't need to be. Presence was the weapon here. I took a step back from the table, papers whispering under my sleeve. My hand brushed the clipboard still hidden in my coat, its edge biting into my ribs like gilt with corners. 1 page, 1 fragment of truth. Enough to damn me, maybe enough to matter. I thought about protocol drills, the lines they drill into you until you dream. In acronyms: obey the chain, preserve the mission, trust the badge. We used to joke about that last one in Berlin bars, over cheap schnapps and cheaper alibis. Trust no one was the punchline. Except it wasn't a joke anymore. It was the only rule still. Breathing, the guard shifted as Clipboard Man nodded toward the corridor. Elevator's ready, he said, like a Mater D announcing dinner. My pulse spiked. So it was back waiting like a mouth at the end of a throat. I walked slow, every step sounding louder than the hum. The corridor smelled different, now less. Metal, more smoke, like something burned just beyond reach. My mind scraped for a signal, a lifeline. There was none. Just concrete walls and my own heartbeat, counting down decisions. Halfway to the elevator, I stopped. The guard on my left tensed just enough to notice. I turned my head, looking at the maps stacked under my arm in my imagination. The maps I didn't take. The pieces I left behind because the weight of one truth already bent my spine. If I stepped into that elevator, the story ended. Maybe not my life, not immediately, but the version of it that still believed in sides, in flags, in the illusion that betrayal were only one color. If I ran, I'd make it 10 feet before those boots behind me wrote the last sentence dot. So I did what fieldwork teaches you when training fails. I lied with my face. Nodded once, slow, like a man resigned. Fine, I said, voice steady. Even. Polite. And I stepped forward, heart pounding like a signal, jammed between frequencies. But as the doors slid open, the hum shifted again lower now, almost human. And for the first time since I dropped into that shaft, I wondered if the machine was listening too. The elevator was waiting like a verdict doors open, light casting a sickly glow on the corridor's gray ribs. I stepped in without hesitation, because hesitation reads like guilt, and guilt gets you questions you don't want to answer. The guards flanked me, silent as statues. Clipboard Man stayed behind, his figure shrinking as the doors closed with a sound too soft for steel. We moved up slow, the hum beneath our feet like a heartbeat counting down. My eyes fixed on the wall, polished enough to throw back a ghost of my face. That's when I caught it movement in the reflection, just behind the guards, not theirs. Someone else's shadow. When the elevator stopped, the doors slid open to a different hallway than the one I entered hours ago. Brighter, wider, less like a secret and more like a hospital corridor stripped bare. White tiles, humming lights, and the faint smell of disinfectant battling something earthy or oil, maybe. Blood. The guards guided me forward without touching me. Touch wasn't necessary. The silence did the work. We turned a corner, and that's when I saw him leaning against the far wall. A shape I knew before his face came into focus. My contact. The man who passed me the note in that cafe near Friedrichstrasse. The one who couldn't meet my eyes. Except now he was looking straight at me, calm as marble, a cigarette dangling from fingers that didn't shake anymore. Small world, he said, his voice casual enough to make my teeth ache. I froze mid-step. The guards didn't move. They didn't need to. My contact pushed off the wall, walking toward me like a man who owned the floor beneath him. No fear, no hurry, just the ease of someone who'd stopped pretending. You've been busy, he said, flicking ash onto the spotless tile. I kept my voice flat. So have you. He smiled then, a slow curve that carried more weight than threats ever could. You think this was your mission? That cute little lead I dropped in your lap? He leaned in, close enough for me to smell the tobacco, the trace of something chemical under it. You weren't sent here to find the truth. You were sent here to measure how much of it you could swallow. My stomach turned, but my face didn't. Training holds even when the ground doesn't. Whose? Pulling the strings? I asked. He chuckled low, humorless. Strings? His eyes flicked to the guards, then back to me. There are no strings, just one knot, and you're standing in it. I wanted to hit him, wanted to grab his collar, slam him against those white tiles until answers spilled like coins. But the look in his eyes told me the truth. There were no answers, just deeper questions, and each one sharpened like a blade. He reached into his coat slowly, deliberate, and pulled out something I didn't expect, a small sealed envelope. Brown paper, no markings, just weight. He pressed it into my hand without ceremony. For when you're home, he said. If you ever get there? I didn't move, didn't breathe. The guards didn't blink. My contact stepped back, the cigarette burning down to a stub, smoke curling like a signature in the air. You think you know betrayal, he said softly. You don't, not yet. Then he turned, walking past the guards like they were furniture. No one stopped him. No one even looked at him. The elevator behind me hummed again, its doors sliding open like a throat clearing. The guards motioned. I stepped inside, envelope burning a hole in my palm, and as the doors closed, the last thing I saw was his reflection in the polished steel, smiling like a man who'd just crossed out the last name on a list dot, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about loyalty. It was about selection. The envelope sat in my pocket like a live charge as the elevator climbed in silence. No hum this time, just a steady vibration, the kind that makes your teeth ache. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that didn't match the descent or the floor before. Narrow, sterile, lined with metal cabinets bolted into the walls like ribs. A guard gestured left. I walked. The room at the end was colder than it had any right to be. Fluorescent light washed everything in a sick shade of white blue. A single table sat in the center, and on it, a folder the color of dried bone. Not paper white, bone. No markings on the cover except one word stamped in black. Classified. Standard issue. Standard lie. They didn't tell me to sit, but I did. The folder was open just enough to tease a corner of its contents. I slid it closer, my gloves squeaking against metal. First page. A letterhead I knew better than my own handwriting, United States Department of Defense. Below it, a signature block that made my stomach knot. Not a name, just an acronym straddling two worlds. USA USSR, like a wedding certificate forged in the dark. The next page was worse. It wasn't text. It was a diagram, rings inside rings, lines slicing them into sectors marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Some were Cyrillic, others weren't any alphabet I'd ever studied. Scribbled notes in English and Russian crawled across the margins like nervous hands. Phrases jumped at me: containment threshold, cognitive spillover. And then, underlined 3 times, human variable unstable. I flipped further, pulse pounding, until I hit a page that stopped me cold. A list of names, columns labeled asset, status, disposition. Some names were crossed out in heavy black strokes, the kind that tear the paper if you press too hard. Others were circled. One name wasn't marked at all, mine. My throat locked. This wasn't surveillance. This was inventory. People, not projects. And the black bars weren't redactions. They were burials, bureaucratic and final. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in blue ink, curved like a smile. Selection complete. I shoved the file closed, heart hammering so hard I almost missed the detail burned into the inside cover. Twin seals embossed side by side, American eagle on the left, Soviet hammer and sickle on the right. No space between them. No daylight. My mind screamed to leave the room, to burn the folder, to claw my way up any staircase until Berlin air filled my lungs. But that voice died the second the door opened behind me. Clipboard man stepped in, casual as a priest at confession. No guards. This time, just him and the soft click of the door locking. He didn't speak at first, just watched me with those calm predator eyes. Finally, he said, "Now you understand why there's no report." I didn't answer. Words felt useless here, like bullets at the bottom of the sea. He walked to the table, his fingers brushing the folder I'd tried to make look untouched. "You were never here," he said softly. "You never saw this. And when you go home, you'll remember that forgetting is a form of patriotism." I wanted to laugh, to spit, to say something brave. But my mouth stayed shut, because the truth was louder than any words. They weren't asking for silence. They were assigning it. He slid the folder toward me again, just an inch. Enough to show the edge of the page where my name waited, untouched. His eyes met mine, steady as steel. "Don't make us finish the line," he said, and that's when I knew the black bars weren't the end of the list. They were the promise of one. The elevator didn't move this time. Clipboard man didn't leave. He just stood there, waiting for me to pick up the folder like it was a holy book and I'd come for confession. I didn't touch it. My fingers hovered over the table, steady in appearance, but my pulse was hammering hard enough to blur the fluorescent light. "Do you know why you're still breathing?" His tone was polite, almost bored. I said nothing. Silence buys more time than lies. He stepped closer, his shoes whispering against the tile, and tapped the folder with one knuckle. "Because you understand what this means. And because you haven't asked the wrong question yet. I kept my eyes on the seal burned into the cover, eagle and sickle, side by side, like old enemies shaking hands in the dark. It didn't feel like history. It felt like anatomy, a heart stitched from two bodies that should have died before they touched. "Why?" I asked finally. Just that. Clipboard man smiled without showing teeth. "Because survival isn't inertial, it's structural." He slid the folder toward me, slow, deliberate, pages fanning like a deck stacked by the devil. "You've been Fed a story your whole life, he said. Two sides. Two ideologies. A war fought for the soul of the world. But the truth? He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper so soft it crawled under my skin. The war ended before it started. We ended it. I forced my voice to work. With this? His eyes flicked toward the vault door behind him, the one sealing in the machine. The blueprints, the chanting I still heard like an echo in bone. With this, he said. And what is this? He didn't answer, not with words. He turned the folder around and opened it wide, letting me see the page that made my stomach turn. A photo, black and white, grainy, but clear enough to punch the breath out of me. The machine, fully assembled, cables braided like veins into a structure that wasn't there when I arrived. Around it, men in suits, not overalls, not guards. Suits with lapel pins that caught the flash, some American, some Soviet. Faces I'd seen on screens during briefings. Men who signed treaties, smiled for cameras, shook hands in Vienna, and smiled like peace was possible. Under the photo, a line typed in neat courier font, Unified Stability Initiative. Phase 1. Complete. I felt the room tilt, a slow slide into something colder than the concrete under my boots. Phase 1, which meant there was a 2, maybe a 3. And if the maps I saw were real, this wasn't about Berlin. This wasn't about borders at all. Clipboard man closed the folder and placed it gently on the table, like a man tucking in a child. You still think flags matter? His voice was silk over steel. They matter to the people watching parades, not to the people who decide if there's a parade to watch. I stared at him, trying to carve some human crack into that mask he wore. And if I tell someone? He chuckled low, almost pitying. You won't, not because of us. Because of them. He tapped the folder again. The names you saw? They signed more than papers. They signed reality. And you think you can outrun that? My throat locked, but my brain kept screaming. Take something. Anything. Proof that this wasn't just a fever dream stitched from paranoia and fluorescent light. My fingers twitched toward the envelope in my pocket, the one my contact gave me, the one I hadn't opened. Maybe that was the only proof I'd ever get. Or maybe it was the last nail in my coffin. Clipboard man stepped back, straightened his coat, and smiled like a man who'd already written my next 20 years. You've got a choice, he said softly. Live with what you know, or die for what you can't change. And then the lights flickered, just once, but enough to send a ripple of heat crawling across the floor. That's when I realized the machine wasn't just running. It was waiting. The corridor back to the elevator felt longer this time, like the walls had stretched in the minutes since Clipboard man's words carved themselves into my skull. Live with what you know, or die for what you can't change. It echoed in step with the hum bleeding up from the concrete. I walked slow, not because I wanted to, but because moving too fast might look like hope, and hope is suspicious in places like this. The envelope in my pocket burned against my thigh, heavier with every step. Proof or trap? Both, probably. The guards didn't follow me all the way. They stopped at a junction, nodded toward the shaft, and let me walk alone. That scared me more than guns in my face. It meant they trusted me to make the right choice, or that the wrong choice didn't matter anymore. The elevator doors opened with the same soft hiss, welcoming me like a throat that never learned to close. I stepped inside. No buttons again, no control. Just walls polished enough to reflect a man who looked like me, but didn't feel like me anymore, as the cab started to rise. The hum thickened, vibrating through my bones like a warning wrapped in metal. My reflection trembled in the steel, splitting into fragments with every flicker of the light above. For a second, I imagined it wasn't me staring back, but someone else wearing my face, someone who'd made a different choice decades ago and never crawled into this hole. Halfway up, the cab jerked. Just once, hard enough to knock the envelope loose from my coat pocket. It hit the floor with a sound too loud for paper. I stared at it like it might bleed. Then I bent down, slow, and picked it up. Brown paper. No markings. No weight it should have had, but weight all the same. The doors opened on a level I didn't recognize. Not the ruin I entered. Not the white-tiled corridor. This was cleaner, quieter. A reception area stripped of any warmth, a desk, a clock ticking without hands, chairs, lined up like soldiers on break. On the far wall, a single door with a brass plate polished to a blind shine. No words, just shine. I walked to it, because what else was there? My boots clicked on the tile like a metronome marking time I didn't own anymore. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room with no windows, no corners. Just walls curving like a question no one answers. In the center, a chair. On the chair, a foam rotary, black, the kind you see in old photos of war rooms. Its cord disappeared into the floor like a root, feeding something buried deep. The phone didn't ring. It didn't need to. I didn't sit. Couldn't. My hand hovered over the receiver anyway, like muscle memory from a life that made sense. Then I pulled back. The envelope tore easy when I ripped it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded twice. I unfolded it slow, racing for codes, maps, instructions. Instead, just one line in neat block letters. If you're reading this, you're already part of IT. No signature, no seal. Just that. My stomach turned to lead. I crumpled the page, wanted to throw it, burn it, swallow it, anything to make it less real. But reality doesn't burn. It waits. The hum under the floor grew louder, deeper, almost like laughter now. Or maybe like breathing. I looked at the phone again, the dial frozen at 0, like an eye that never blinks. They'd given me a choice, hadn't they? Live or die, forget or fight. But standing there, in that room without shadows, I realized something colder. Choices are theater. The play ends the same way, no matter what you pick. When I stepped back into the corridor, the elevator was gone. The corridor stretched into silence, bare as bone. No hum now. No lights flickering like nervous eyes. Just stillness so deep it made my pulse sound like footsteps. The elevator was gone, swallowed whole, like it never existed. I stood there with the crumpled paper sweating in my fist, thinking about exits that weren't real and choices that were theater. There was a door at the far end, small, metal, painted the color of dust. No handle, no lock, just there, like an afterthought. I walked toward it because standing still felt worse. Halfway down, I heard them. Not boots, not voices, just breathing. Low, controlled, like the room itself was alive. I turned slowly, scanning the walls, the ceiling, nothing. Then the door behind me clicked soft, like a tongue against teeth. Clipboard man stepped through, flanked by 2 ghosts in gray. No guards this time, no performance, just inevitability. Wearing a face I'd already memorized. "You're persistent," he said, tone almost warm, like a teacher addressing a slow student. His eyes dropped to my hand. "And predictable." I opened my fist. The paper hung limp, its single sentence glaring like a wound. His smile sharpened. "Good. It means the message landed. What is this?" My voice cracked the way steel does when heat hits too fast. "Recruitment? Indoctrination?" He tilted his head. Perspective. He walked closer, shoes whispering on tile, and stopped just shy of touching me. "You think betrayal has a flag," he said softly. "It doesn't. It has utility. Today, it was useful for them to be enemies. tomorrow it won't be. That's not treason, Agent. That's arithmetic. I wanted to hit him. Wanted to drive my fist through that calm mask until numbers spilled out like teeth. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning since the vault. What's the machine for? His smile didn't move, but his eyes did just enough to. Flicked toward the floor, like the answer was humming under our feet. You don't build a bomb to win a war, he said. You build it to make sure the next war never starts. And this thing? My throat tightened. It stops wars? No, he said. It ends them. The words crawled into me like frost. Ends them. Clean, final, without borders or survivors. My mind flashed to the maps, the rings, the gaps that weren't mistakes. Dates like countdowns. Places already, marked for something no one outside this room would ever understand. You think you can control it? I asked. He laughed then. Quiet, like a man who's run out of pity. Control is a story we tell children, he said. This isn't about control. It's about inevitability. The door behind him creaked open, and light bled in weak gray, the kind that tastes like dawn through dirty glass. He stepped aside, motioning toward it like a host at the end of a bad dinner. Go home, he said. Write your little report. Leave out the parts you can't prove, which by now is all of it. I stared past him through that slit of daylight and felt something twist in my gut. Something worse than fear, resignation. Because he was right. Even if I walked out, even if I screamed every word into a microphone, it would vanish in the static of classified denials and redacted ink. The truth wouldn't die. It would hibernate, waiting for men like him to wake. It when the math demanded blood. I stepped past him slow, carrying nothing but the weight of knowing. The gray ghosts didn't move. Neither did the hum under the floor. For a second, I thought I heard it laugh again. Or maybe that was me when I reached the door. I didn't look back. Some betrayals aren't meant to be seen twice. Outside, Berlin. Was still Berlin cold air, dirty snow? A city split by walls no one really believed in anymore. I lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, exhaled smoke into the gray, and whispered the only truth left. It was never East versus West. It was us against whatever waits when men stop pretending they're different. And that was the last time I trusted silence. I kept the envelope for years, tucked in the back of a drawer I never opened unless the nights got too long. Sometimes I wondered if the paper inside would fade, if the ink would surrender like the men who wrote it. It never did. Every now and then, I'd catch a sound, the hum of a radiator, the whisper of a train, and it would drag me back to that shaft, to that room without corners, to the chair with the phone that never rang. I'd imagine picking it up just once, just to hear what voice would answer, but I never did. Some calls aren't meant to be made. Some truths aren't meant to leave the basement. And yet, here I am telling you. Maybe because time doesn't kill secrets. It just teaches them how to wait. Before you disappear, hit that like button. Subscribe if you still believe walls keep anything out. And tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far these echoes travel.